Parents strongly caution the following programs are intended for mature audiences over the age of 18. These programs may contain some material that many parents would not find suitable for children and may include intense violence, sexual situations, coarse language, and suggestive dialogue.
Oh, sup everyone, CBM Productions here. Excuse me if I seem a little disheveled. I just figured out how to travel the multiverse so I can find a universe where JENNA ORTEGA is canonically my wife. I think this universe is suitable enough, everything seems okay. God fucking damn it. Should've listened to my attorney earlier.
So, I'm in the middle of a really sticky situation here, Mr. Birdman. See, I'm trying to lift this restraining order on my girlfriend. See, we're not actually together. She actually kind of put the restraining order on me because I tried to break into her house. And I was just wondering, if I were to go into an alternate timeline, would that restraining order matter or would I still get prosecuted? Again.
Well, on the bright side, at least Utah's no longer canon, and so is Ezra Miller. Speaking of, let's talk about The Flash, shall we?
Hi. Always just knock you out, and then you won't have to panic. What?
A film that went from being one of the most hyped comic book films and films in general to release this year, to being a film that's losing more money than Ezra Miller's net worth. It's a real catastrophe on several fronts, and I really do feel bad for a lot of the craze involved with this film. Because despite a lot of the backlash the film's received, I actually think the film's pretty decent after watching it twice. And I think it is slightly overhated. Were there mistakes made? Absolutely. I mean, come on WB, you cut Henry Cavill from this movie, but you don't cut Ezra Miller microwaving a baby? Shit's wild, man. But after only 4 weeks in theaters, I think it's pretty safe to say at this point that The Flash has wrapped up its theatrical run. And looking at the numbers, they aren't that pretty. The film's overall box office performance as of this recording, domestically at least, has barely crawled over $100 million. Around the same amount that Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania made on its opening weekend. And worldwide, it's made around $260 million, which is around the same amount as its reported production budget. Now, a lot of regular folk who aren't in on the movie business might see a $250 million movie making $260 million as it breaking even, and that is not the case whatsoever. Not only does the film cost reportedly even more so than $250 million, possibly up to $300 million, which doesn't include the millions and millions of dollars included in prints and advertising. For a film of this scale, you need to make at least like around $600 to $700 million just to break even and start going to the green for profits. If this movie came out 5 years ago, back when it was set to drop, well before Ezra Miller became public enemy #1, and the DCEU was relevant, these final box office numbers is what it would have made probably on its opening weekend alone, and possibly even more. And now it's reported that The Flash will lose WB up to $200 million, making it so far the biggest box office flop in comic book movie history, taking over the top spot from the previous champion being Shazam! Fury of the Gods, the previous DC film that released earlier this year. It's sad how poorly this film performed, but alas, this is the timeline that we live in. And there are many reasons as to why this film fell on its face. Of course, the biggest culprits are Ezra Miller themselves, who not only plays the main character, but 3 characters simultaneously, in an era where no one wants to see Ezra Miller have a career. After multiple allegations and several layers of crimes I don't even know where to start to get into, this film being a part of the final batch of films released in this dying DCEU, when it was never intended to be the end of the universe, so why invest your money into a movie where you're not going to get an entirely closed off story? There's also the amount of overhype that the film had in the months building up to its release date, and when general audiences actually got to see the movie, and it wasn't as mind-blowing as they expected it to be, it became an easy punching bag in the reception following the film's release. Sure, there are people that enjoyed the movie, but a lot of the reception that's been coming out about this movie has been mostly negative. So people who are in the movie space just see this film as an absolute joke, and the people that aren't in the movie space just see all the negative reception the film's received, all the crimes against Ezra Miller and the controversy around them, and seeing clips of like the Flash microwaving a baby, and they think the whole film's a joke as well. It's a real bad conundrum the film is in, and it's sad to say the film really had no true ground to stand on. Now, there are some smaller reasons as to why the film hasn't performed that some people have pointed out that I don't really entirely agree with. The two primary ones I keep hearing getting hurled at this movie, along with other recent superhero films as well, is the whole notion of superhero fatigue kicking in as well as multiverse fatigue kicking in. I don't think these things are as an effect as much as people want you to believe it is. Yes, it is true that a handful of the superhero films that have come out in like the past year or so haven't done so well at the box office when you're talking about Black Adam, Ant-Man 3, Shazam 2, The Flash. These movies aren't raking in as much of the box office dollars as much as they would have 5 years earlier. But I don't think these movies underperforming has much to do with people just being sick of superhero films, for the most part. I just think people are just sick of mediocre to bad movies. When you look at all the films I just mentioned, Black Adam, Shazam 2, Ant-Man 3, none of these movies were really well received by critics or audiences alike. They didn't break any new ground. And they really weren't worthy of the theatrical experience of people like rushing out to see them on opening weekend. A lot of people would rather just see them in a couple months when it drops on streaming or just skip on it entirely. And that's a pattern for a lot of the films that have been released this summer so far, whether you're talking about Fast X, Little Mermaid, Transformers, Indiana Jones, Elemental, The Flash. None of these movies have been generally praised by audiences or critics. And with how over budgeted a lot of these movies are to the point where they have to make billions of dollars just to break even, on top of the at best lukewarm response to a lot of these movies, people just don't want to spend their money on movies that just aren't worthy of the theatrical experience. And it makes the profit margins for these movies a lot more slim than a lot of studios would like to have. I would say super fatigue is settling in if it wasn't for the fact that the only two movies that made money this summer hand over fist, at least in terms of major releases, have been Guardians of the Galaxy 3 and Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Both being comic book movies and both being well received by audiences and critics alike. I'm not arguing that the amount of content we're getting in the superhero space is a little too much for a lot of people's liking, including myself at some points. But I don't think super fatigue is settling in. I just think that people are just more picky with what they want. They want better comic book properties, and they're willing to invest into the films that actually are worth their time. If movies like Kraven the Hunter and The Marvels get bad reviews and underperform at the box office, I don't think that signals the death of superhero movies. I just think that people are just sick of bad movies. Unless it's Morbius. And in regards to multiverse fatigue, I don't think that's settling in as well. First off, there really aren't enough movies to really peg that against as a fatigue in my opinion. Especially since Across the Spider-Verse proved that people aren't sick of the multiverse concept and are willing to accept them if they provide a good story and good characters. I mean, hell, even the previous Best Picture winner this year was a multiverse movie. And especially since we're really not going to get another multiverse movie until Deadpool 3 that comes out next summer, and maybe Beyond the Spider-Verse in the same year, if it comes out next year. I don't think the multiverse concept is played out yet. Hopefully. If that's the case, then Marvel's in for a rough next few years. Now, looking at this movie's overall box office performance in retrospect, could there have been any moves played by WB that could have lessened the blow of this movie's terrible box office run? While this movie always would have had a lot of stuff stacked against it, given the hands it was dealt outside of the film's control, that don't involve dropping another $200 million to reshoot the entire movie, I do think WB not being vocal or speaking out against Ezra Miller's crimes while they were happening did contribute to the movie losing a few audience members. Especially compared to other cases like Johnny Depp, who was instantly dropped from another cut-off franchise starring Ezra Miller and Fantastic Beasts, where once the controversy headlines started dropping between him and Amber Heard in that huge feud, WB immediately dropped him from the franchise and wanted nothing to do with him. And even looking at other Flash properties in the case of Hartley Sawyer on the Flash CW show, who was immediately fired from the show after a bunch of old racist tweets came out from him years earlier, they dropped him like a fly. Now, I understand with cases like those, you're dealing with a supporting actor in your production, not with literally the face of the film itself. So it's easier to get somebody to replace them. But the fact from 2020 onward, when Ezra was caught on camera choking a woman in Iceland during COVID lockdowns, to the rampage he went on last year, WB was just a bystander and didn't do anything to help the situation. Now, I understand that the execs of WB are not Ezra Miller's guardians that have no obligation to intervene whenever he's letting babies just be around firearms or assaulting people in Hawaii.
I had to beat an old lady with a stick to get these cranberries.
But the fact that the old regime of Warner Brothers nor the new regime that we currently have chose to not make any sort of statement regarding how, Ezra Miller's crimes are not up to the standard of WB's morals or some PR bullshit like that. It made it seem that WB had no backbone. I do think people who were in on the Flash drama decided not to support the movie because WB decided to give Ezra Miller a leg up over other actors, who had way less stacked against them. I do also think the vagueness of who's sticking around James Gunn's new DCU that isn't already tied to James Gunn's previous properties that he made prior to being CEO of DC Studios is another thorn that caused this movie to lose a few audience members. Now, that may just be because James Gunn and Peter Safran at the time, and possibly even now, just didn't know what they want to do with the future of several of these characters like Flash, Wonder Woman, Shazam, Aquaman, etc. But besides saying that The Flash was going to reset the DCU,
Into The Flash, a fantastic movie that I really love that resets the entire DC universe.
which sounds weird in retrospect after watching the film and realizing that that might not be the case, there is no definitive answer if this film, as well as any other film that's being released this year under DC, was going to matter in James Gunn's plan. I also think that hurt the movie's chances because if you look at it from somebody who isn't in on the movie business and isn't in on like checking in on every single update regarding James Gunn's DCU plans, if you see the reports of characters like Batman, Superman being rebooted for the brand new DC universe, and is DCU being labeled first and foremost as a reboot, why wouldn't the average audience member not assume that The Flash, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, Shazam, etc. aren't going to be recast as well? And considering the fact that none of these 2023 DCEU movies were considered to be the ending of the franchise, they all feel incomplete because they're setting up things for future films that will never be explored or followed through with. Which is kind of sad because I want to see that Caterpillar from Shazam's plan come to fruition. But we can't have nice things, can we? It's not even comparable to like when Disney released Dark Phoenix and New Mutants after they purchased Fox, where both those films were basically standalone and focused on their own story, not setting up future things that will never come to fruition. Even if those films weren't great, they at least stood on their own as movies and don't feel like watching a canceled TV show in the sense like watching Shazam 2, The Flash, most likely Aquaman 2. Had we had more clarity in regards to who was staying in this DCU or not, would have cleared a lot of the air and would have made these films feel more relevant, at least to me. And maybe had WB not moved this movie a week forward to push it against Elemental on its opening weekend, which all it did with that move was just make Elemental's box office disappointment as well not as bad by comparison. And even looking at this most recent box office weekend, Elemental is still in the top 5, whereas Flash isn't even in the top 10 even more. After only 3 weeks of being there, that stinks. But even if WB was completely transparent against Ezra Miller's crimes and the future of the DCU, that isn't compared to the amount of the things that was stacked up against. From the lack of promotional tie-ins, putting way too much investment in Michael Keaton's Batman being the sole reason to draw in box office revenue, to a mostly Gen Z and millennial crowd that didn't grow up with his movies, in the same way had WB convinced Christian Bale to take up the Batman role again. There's also just playing competition as well with so many other movies coming out recently and not only in theaters but also on streaming as well. This movie was poised to fail. And it does suck because I generally did like this movie and I don't think it deserves the amount of hate it's been getting over the past month or so. Now looking beyond this movie's box office performance, what are the ramifications to the future DC movies? Now it's always been obvious even before this movie came out that Ezra Miller, even if The Flash broke $1 billion worldwide, they would never come back to play The Flash again. It would just be too much of a risk and a PR nightmare. But I hope more than anything else that The Flash doesn't turn into another Green Lantern situation, or because this movie performed so poorly that they decide never to touch the character again for a decade plus. And looking at Blue Beetle and Aquaman 2 coming out later this year, once again, I think that the overall confusion and the uncertainty of whether these films are going to matter or not in the future DCU plans are going to hurt these films in the long run. Because DC is a tarnished brand right now, and ever since its DCU's begun over a decade ago, they've never really had a great reputation of being consistent in quality, and they've never been on solid ground. And these movies don't really seem to be in good company. More so Aquaman 2 than Blue Beetle because of the obvious reasons, of it being directly tied to what came before, and with Amber Heard still lurking around the film, the controversies don't stop for the DCEU. And with Blue Beetle, despite it's meant to be the unofficial start of the new DCU, most general people don't know that. And I do understand general audiences seeing the trailers for this film and assuming it's going to be in the same universe as The Flash, considering the fact that when it was shot, it was canonically meant to be in the same DCEU. And even with James Gunn's statements regarding Blue Beetle not being the first movie but the first character in the DCU, which is kind of strange considering the fact there's an Amanda Waller series coming out with Viola Davis reprising the character that was in the Suicide Squad movies and in Black Adam and in Peacemaker, which also there's a second season of Peacemaker still coming out despite the fact that we don't even know if it's in the same continuity. Which doesn't really make a whole lot of sense considering the fact that the first season clearly is set in the DCEU, even with Ezra Miller and Jason Momoa showing up in cameos at the very end of the show. So what's the true story of the DCU? Do you have to watch the DCEU previously to understand some of the elements of this new DCU? Or is stuff like Peacemaker Season 2 just gonna be an elsewhere story entirely? Listen, I love James Gunn, I can't wait to see how this universe that he's creating unfolds. But the continuity of what you have to watch and what's gonna matter in this new DCU or not just drives me up a fucking wall. Another issue of Blue Beetle being the only confirmed film out of the 4 DCU films released this year that's gonna matter somewhat down the line, hopefully, is that you really can't advertise it being the first start of the DCU, because if you do that, you're gonna undermine Aquaman 2, which if that underperforms, like who knows if that's gonna matter in James Gunn's DCU plans. And styles from the trailers are not unique enough to really signify to audiences that this clearly is not set in the DCU but a new universe, like, with Joaquin Phoenix's Joker or Matt Reeves' Batman. Where someone can watch a trailer for like the Joker or the Batman with no general knowledge of the behind-the-scenes drama regarding DC, And it clearly signifies to the audience that Joaquin Phoenix's Joker is not in the same universe as Jared Leto's Joker. Same with Robert Pattinson's Batman not being the same as Ben Affleck's Batman. Blue Beetle looks like a movie where he can interact with Jason Momoa's Aquaman, Ezra Miller's Flash, and not feel out of place. Even down to having the same DC logo with no changes. I mean, how are you expecting audiences to show up for a new DC movie that's meant to set up a brand new DC universe while it looks exactly like the old DCEU they're trying to kick out? I don't really know how that's going to work, and I really don't think that either of these movies are going to perform super well. I think it will signify, and I think it will be put in the record books, that 2023 for DC will probably be the rock bottom year for the foreseeable future.
No diving. No diving in an empty pool.
Now, before I do end this video, I do want to end it on a more positive note. Now, with the failures of the DC films that have come out this year so far and possibly in the future, does the failures of these DC films that have come out this year mean the death of DC entirely, or that DC will forever be a tarnished brand? No. I think the amount of space that will be given between the releases of Aquaman 2 and Superman Legacy, I think enough time will pass so people will be willing to give DC another chance. And with James Gunn's quality of filmmaking that he brings to every single one of his projects, I do expect Superman Legacy to be better received than any of the DC films that are coming out this year currently. And if these upcoming DCU projects are well regarded and well liked, people will flock to them. I mean, look at Joker, look at the Batman. People will turn up to great comic book films if you give it to them. But so many films in this recent DCEU have ranged from just being average to just straight up bad. And DC, even before the new regime stepped in, has always struggled with keeping high quality, consistent content being produced. And I have nothing but faith for both Peter Safran and James Gunn that they will really ride shit with DC and create a great cinematic universe. So Godspeed to them both. Anyways, I gotta head out because this universe is about to collapse on itself, and I better fix the timeline because if I don't, things are gonna get a little messy. But it will not stop my hunt for Jenna Ortega to be my wife. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please like, comment, share, and subscribe for more content. And remember, it's hard to be a perfect person,
but not a decent one.